Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sara Spinks.
Hello. Today we're following on from the first podcast we did on the government strategy, keeping children safe and helping families thrive. So if you've not listened to our previous podcast, you may wish to do that before listening to this one. So today we're focusing on education, which sits at the heart of safeguarding within this new strategy.
That's right, Sarah, and there's so much to unpack.
Well, let's jump right in. So one of the big changes in the new strategy is a shift in the education's role in safeguarding. So currently, schools are seen as relevant partners in multi-agency arrangements, but the proposals aim to make them statutory partners. Sam, why is this so significant?
Well, actually, this is a really important development. So first of all, just for listeners, just to explain, currently safeguarding practice is driven locally by safeguarding partnerships. And these partnerships, they drive the strategy and practice, as well as having other roles across each individual local authority. So they're led by statutory partners, which their representation is social care, health, and the police. So supporting this strategic work is the relevant partners. So these are those who have contact across children's services. So education, because of obviously their contact that they have with children. Education is what we call a relevant partner. So that's those who have contact with children's services and they've got that contact. So schools and alternative settings, they have the most consistent contact with children out of all the agencies. They've got the most consistent contact with children and their families. And with regard to families, that's particularly in early years and primary education. So they're often the first agency to notice signs of neglect or abuse or, any other sort of safeguarding issue. And they're actually the second largest referrer to children's social care after the police. So the move to making education a statutory partner, that elevates their role into the decision making and the formation of the strategy. And that change will ensure that their input, education's input, is central to safeguarding.
Absolutely. For me, it's surprising that they weren't already in that role as education is. As you said, that they are the key player in seeing children every day and having the most contact with parents. So what's been the barrier to making education a statutory partner before now, do you think?
Well, historically, safeguarding has been seen as the domain of social care and the police. Education's always been a key player operationally, but hasn't had the same strategic influence. So this change reflects a recognition, I think, of how critical schools are in early intervention and ongoing child protection.
And another major aspect of the strategy is the introduction of integrated multi-agency teams. Mm-hmm. What do you think about this approach?
Well, integrated teams are a fantastic idea in principle.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing together experienced practitioners from social care, from health, from education and the police, that can lead to quicker, more accurate harm identification and swifter action. But as with any multi-agency initiative, the success will depend on clear joint working practices. And there's been lots of guidance and legislation regarding what practitioners are accountable for in their own multi-agency role, but not about how to do it effectively within joint working aspects.
Oh, that's really, really true. You've mentioned challenges with siloed working in the past. How can this be avoided in these sort of integrated teams?
Well, siloed working happens when agencies don't communicate effectively, when they don't fully understand each other's roles or the different thresholds each agency uses. And I mean, those listening within the world of education will certainly recognise that it can be very, very frustrating where you feel you've clearly got something that you feel needs support, and yet it's not meeting social care thresholds. And you get that whole thing, I don't know why social care isn't intervening. That's because they work on different thresholds. So it's almost like a marriage of all of this. You've really got to, there's a big, big process of understanding how the different agencies work. To avoid this, you really need robust processes, you need shared training, and you need good, robust, strong leadership to ensure that everyone is on the same page. So it's not sort of things like, well, I do it this way because I'm a social worker, and I do this way because I'm a teacher, and I do this way because I'm a health practitioner. And that doesn't happen overnight. Historical programs like On Track, and some people may be familiar with that, and to some extent, Sure Start, which actually came out of the work that On Track did. That offers lessons on how to establish and maintain successful multi-agency working. That's not just people working in their separate agencies working together. It's being together and working together, and that's the difference.
And I know that you've led such teams, Sam, So what were the sort of key elements that made this work really effectively?
Well, I led the On Track programme for many years, and that was a multi-agency early intervention programme in England. And it was co-funded by the DfE and Home Office, and it was aimed at reducing crime and antisocial behaviour among children aged 4 to 12 by addressing root causes within families and communities. So it focused on prevention through integrated support, from education, health, social services and the police. And it offered both universal, so like broad services, and targeted services, where issues were particularly known. And as I said, it influenced the later initiatives like Sure Start. So when it comes to what made the multi-agency teams work so well, a few things really stood out. First off, strong partnerships were key. Over time, the teams moved from being a bit chaotic at first to having clear roles and responsibilities. Embedding the work within broader initiatives like the Children's Fund, and the Children's Fund actually at one point took over the overseeing of the On Track programmes. That really helped create continuity and alignment. Then there's the accountability. When agencies had direct responsibility for delivering services, they naturally became more engaged. So it created a real sense of ownership by each agency, by everybody. Another important piece was the local learning. Teams weren't afraid to adapt to what their communities actually needed. And it was actually a fantastic opportunity to be able to do that. By sharing insights and tailoring their approach, they were actually able to deliver better outcomes. We also can't forget the importance of having clear agreements, having strong service level agreements in place, tackling any of those tensions early. That meant everyone was on the same page from the start. And of course, there was the data sharing. That can be a huge challenge. But by building that trust and setting those clear protocols, the teams were able to share information effectively, and that made everything run more smoothly. And I think finally, there was this careful balance between that big picture strategy, which, let's face it, that's what this new proposed strategy that we're talking about today is. It's a big picture strategy. It was a balance between that and the day-to-day operations. So teams stayed focused on the goals while still meeting the immediate needs on the ground. And when you put all of that together, it created teams that were adaptable, cohesive, and focused on delivering real results. And it's a great example of what collaboration can achieve.
And very interesting read for anybody who wants to look at that in terms of research. I think, was it Loughborough University?
It was.
Did a very
it was,
interesting piece on it. I mean, it is available online as well.
It is.
And I had a good read of that. And it does give you a whole structure about when it's done well, how it's done well. And I think this is something that this strategy could learn from. Yeah. So let's now talk about home education. So the strategy includes new measures requiring local authority consent for home education in certain cases, such as a Section 47 child protection inquiry. Why do you think that's important?
Well, it's a really sensible precaution. Sometimes parents may withdraw children from mainstream schooling to avoid professional scrutiny. And we know that. And those that are involved in child protection practice will know that. It's almost like the run up to a Section 47. A Section 47 is where there are, there's significant concerns, and social care have done an initial assessment, and they find enough to hit the thresholds that requires a further look, which is really, and that's putting it very, very simply. But it leads to a Section 47 child protection inquiry where all agencies are then required to attend, and it's headed up by social care. And that whole process can obviously, for the family, for the parents, it can feel very intrusive and very difficult. And there's all sorts of things that can be going on. And there can be a tendency to want to try and avoid this professional scrutiny. So by requiring local authority consent in this situation, we'll be able to ensure that children who may be at risk are not hidden from the safeguarding systems that exist within the school system, that ongoing sort of monitoring and scrutiny. And I think that's really, really important. So introducing a children not in school register will also help track these children and provide support where needed.
And do you see sort of any challenges with implementing this?
Well, yeah, I mean, balancing parental rights with it, with safeguarding is always delicate. And again, for those in education, they do that regularly when you've got concerns, because you're having to, at the same time, you're trying to maintain the relationship that you have with the parents. So it is delicate. Some parents, may see it as intrusive. So clear communication and transparency, that will be essential to gain public trust. But I have to say that those changes are really positive, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. So let's move on to the extension of the role of the virtual head. So this is another area of focus. There's plans to extend it to include children in kinship arrangements and potentially those leaving custody. Why is this extension so critical, do you think?
Well, have we done a podcast, Sarah, on the role of the virtual school? I'm not sure if we've certainly written articles about it. So again, if you're not sure what we're alluding to here, please do have a look on the website. There's more support and information there. But just very briefly, the virtual school head is really a champion for the education of children in care, ensuring that they have the support that they need to success and succeed and thrive and achieve their full potential. So, as I've said, if you're not familiar, check out that role. There's an overview of that. It's a really crucial role, and there's an overview on our website. So extending this role to monitoring and supporting children in kinship care and those leaving custody, that addresses significant gaps. These children often face unique challenges, and having an advocate to focus on their educational outcomes, that can make a huge difference in their lives.
I mean, I was quite shocked, actually, that children leaving custody weren't included already anyway,
Yeah.
So what do you think? Let's unpick that a bit more. What do you think about including children leaving custody?
It's absolutely essential. I mean, they are, in comparison with how we group other children in terms of how we look at vulnerable children. Thankfully, they are a small group. However, they're incredibly vulnerable, often already facing barriers to re-entering education or employment. So support from a virtual school head could help them transition more successfully. At the moment, the strategy just says it's being considered, but I think it's vital. In fact, I can't actually think of a single reason why it's not a good idea.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to me, it's a no-brainer that such vulnerable children aren't in receipt of this additional safeguard.
Yeah.
So the strategy sounds promising, but as you pointed out, it won't be without its challenges. What do you see as the biggest hurdles to education?
Yeah, well, we talked about the overarching hurdles in the first part of the podcast. So just focusing, really on from an education's perspective, there are several. First, not surprisingly, funding.
Yeah.
Integrated multi-agency models and expanded roles like the virtual school head, that will require substantial investment in staff, training and infrastructure. Also, local authority care is expensive, but so are community models. And we know that. We've seen that in the past where there's been expected benefits from moving. I'm thinking about health, a big
Care in the
shift
community.
into it was at the Virginia Bottomley days, the care in the community, expecting to save lots of money. And in fact, it was far more expensive to actually fund health community care. So these community models, they are expensive. So from a purely budgetary perspective, I'm not convinced that this will have the impact government office is expecting, because I think they're expecting to save a load of money by not having children going into care. Second, recruitment and retention. We've already a significant shortage, as I've said before, of social workers and teachers. This strategy relies on these professionals. And if we're talking about teachers and if we're talking about virtual school heads, these are very experienced in their own profession before you can even go into that role. So it's a little bit like in a school. You wouldn't expect, a newly qualified teacher to take on a deputy or a DSL role. They haven't got the practice experience there.
Yeah.
So again, that's not something you can just magically create any one role. You just can't, you just can't do it. And finally, for me, and this is one, it's really close to my heart because of the work I've done in the past. It's about achieving that genuine, and I stress the word genuine, collaboration across agencies, where it isn't just about working together at a distance. It's where practice is assimilated and it becomes robust. And that takes understanding. And I do hope that considering the on-track pilot, I think it ran for over 10 years. There's a lot to be learned from that. I really hope that the current Labour government will reflect back on the work of the previous Labour government and actually, use that data, that externally validated data. That is going to take, that assimilation and getting that practice robust. It's going to require a lot of effort and it's going to require a lot of financial investment and a lot of things to be worked out.
Absolutely. So do you think that the government have sort of underestimated these challenges?
I think they've acknowledged most of them, not all of them, because I do think there are things that they genuinely hasn't hit the radar yet. So I think they've acknowledged most of them, but they haven't fully addressed how they'll kind of overcome the challenges. For example, there's little mention of how they'll tackle the workforce crisis. And that's fundamental, regardless of in a social care, children's social care context. We haven't got that general principle of how we're going to tackle this crisis of recruitment and retention across all the main professions.
Absolutely. So that's fundamental, isn't it? To the success of this reform. Yeah.
It is, absolutely. Absolutely, Sarah.
Yeah, so, your final thoughts before we wrap up, Sam. What's your takeaway from this strategy?
Well, I know I totally, I'm behind reforming children's social care, and my goodness, it is needed, it's needed to be addressed, and this should have been done a long, long time ago. However, I think this proposed strategy and the proposed legislation, I think the best I can say is it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
So the focus on keeping children with their families where appropriate, improving multi-agency collaboration, addressing gaps in the care system, that's encouraging, but it's not a quick fix. An implementation that's going to require, as I've said, significant investment, cultural shift change in how agencies work together. And let's face it, we've had working together to safeguard children, the multi-agency statutory guidance for agencies on how to work together for, I think, since, was it 2009?
Yeah.
And we still have reviews when things go wrong. We have statements like agencies are not working, they've not shared information, they're not working together, they're working in silos. And that's been in place since 2009.
Yeah.
So that's an indicator, isn't it, that
Yeah.
it's more than just central statutory policy documentation and guidance. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on the ground.
Absolutely.
So I think what will be needed for this to be successful is a real commitment to addressing the structural issues as well, like poverty, inequality, etc., child violence, gang culture, all of that stuff. So it worries me slightly that this is being taken forward as one thing, when actually it's part of a much bigger picture. It's a little bit like looking at safeguarding and child protection and just thinking about that within the context of the home and the family.
Yeah.
No, you need to look at the contextual elements, all the other drivers that are putting children at risk.
Yeah. And all the preventative things that can go in place beforehand as well, because that's been cut to the bone in terms of financial investment within that. So I suppose there's a sort of cautious optimism with this strategy as a generic overarching principle.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's welcome that we finally have central government who are actually going to try and tackle this. They're tackling it perhaps not necessarily for it's not necessarily being driven for the most important reason, in my view. I think an awful lot of this has got to do with finance, and actually that's, this is not, it's not going to help them. But I am cautiously optimistic. And, if the government follows through with the necessary resources and support, these reforms they have the potential to transform children's social care. But without that, we risk repeating the mistakes of the past.
And how tragic would that be, Sam, if 10 years from now, we're seeing exactly the same?
Absolutely.
There has to be some change. Thanks.